Thanks very much for the invitation. It's good to see some old friends here, too. Best place to start for me would be my first involvement with the Balkans was in May 1980. Down in Calgary, I'm delivering the morning paper, the Albertan. And that morning, Tito had died. And I had a customer who had a very heavy East European accent. He took a look at the paper and said, there would be civil war in Yugoslavia. And I'm 13 thinking, okay, I know there's Yugoslavia, I know it's a weird form of communism, but beyond that, I didn't think that 13, 14 years later I'd actually go there or have any understanding of the place. So that's sort of where it started with me. In '92, I was posted to Germany to 4th Canadian Mechanized Brigade and became the historian for the brigade. And the first rotations of some of the things we're going to talk about came out of our brigade. And so I was able to see that firsthand. The last chapter of that history dealt with Op Harmony. And I had a number of ECMM observers that wound up working with me. So I got into it. That was sort of my entry drug into the Balkans. So just a couple right and left of arcs on this. I mean, everything we're going to talk about here, I could do a 45-minute lecture on, and I do at RMC, more or less. So, but I want everybody to see the breadth and depth of and when I say our, I'm talking about Canada, our involvement in the Balkans from the military perspective, okay? And so there are certain things that get highlighted, there are certain things that get forgotten, but I want to give a good overview for everybody here so you can see what we actually did there, at least for the first period. And here's some bullet points straight up. We were dealing with multiple coalitions at the same time. We had basically a brigade minus deployed for a period, if you look at the numbers. Continuous naval presence, which gets completely overlooked. Air, we deal with UNHCR airlift support. Special operations forces cut their teeth in the Balkans. And fundamentally, the logistic effort, which gets overlooked completely, was tremendous. So we're going to look at 1991 to 1995 and take it right up to basically the Dayton Accords. So the first mission I'm going to discuss is the European Community Monitor Mission, or what we called Op Bolster. And the first crew that came out of 4 Brigade to Op Bolster was about 5 people. It would jump up to about 12 later. It's a smaller mission, but it's really, really important. The first part of the Yugoslavia to collapse was Slovenia. And Slovenia basically was mono-ethnic, so it broke away much more cleanly than other parts of Yugoslavia. Plus its proximity to Austria and Italy. There's already a good trade relationship, and of course it goes right back to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So what happens in this case is that the Yugoslav army had a lot of forward deployed forces there, partly as a result of the Cold War. And when the Slovenians planned their independence, part of the plan was to surround and blockade, that doesn't show up too well, but basically all the camps and bases and logistic support sites within Slovenia that were part of the Yugoslav army were surrounded and held hostage. And so there was fighting, but it was clear to Belgrade that this was untenable. There was just no way they could hold on to Slovenia. And so the question became, how do you extract from that? And that led to something called the Brioni Accords. And under the Brioni Accords, the objective was to figure out how to move not just the personnel from the Yugoslavian army, but also the equipment. There's a lot of equipment in there, and they weren't going to leave that behind. And at the same time, Slovenia wanted various concessions from Belgrade. So the result is this strange organization. Originally, they go to OSCE to broker this, and then OSCE basically subcontracts it to the European community. But the players involved said they would only agree to this if there was a non-European North American country that was part of the organization to do the extraction, and that became Canada. So Op Bolster's set up. These guys get known as the ice cream men. I think it's a little blurry there again, but everybody's wearing white. The mandate they're operating under is to basically count everything and then make sure everything departs over back into the Yugoslav border, okay? And so this is actually quite successful. However, ECMM continues to exist beyond its original mandate. And as things collapse throughout Yugoslavia, it becomes one of the few organizations that actually can collect information on the ground and feed it to various diplomatic efforts, almost like we'll see with UNMOS later. But these guys have their information sponges, and they have the ability to transmit stuff. And it's dangerous because belligerents think that they're spies or treat them as such. I think there was a Dutch helicopter shot down. Almost all the Bill, you remember some of the people we worked with that were ECMM. They were severely abused in many cases, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So ECMM will expand into throughout the Balkans and begin becoming, I would say, a useful tool to understand what's going on for situational awareness. All right, so the first UN mission we're involved with is UNPROFOR 1, Operation Harmony. Now again, everybody here will have heard parts of it. Medak is well known. The movement down at the airfield in Sarajevo is well known, but there are other aspects of it that get overlooked, and they're important to understand. So I'm going to move to the map here. Op Harmony operating areas were divided into several sectors. Now these sectors were established by what was called the Vance Plan, not to be confused with the Vance-Owen Peace Plan. Inside Croatia, the Ukrainian Serbian forces and the Croatian forces have fought to a standstill. They basically were starting to run out of ammo, and the lines sort of froze in place. So the Vance Plan was designed to capitalize on basically freezing that in place and get negotiations going. And troops deployed into 4 sectors. Canadian troops initially deployed into Sector West in 1992. And those troops came out of 4 Canadian Mechanized Brigade, including 4 CER and a composite battalion of Vandus and RCR. And again, the objective here was basically to disarm everybody within the sector and then stop people, outside forces intervening in the sector. You can see how problematic this becomes. Later on, the Canadian troops are moved down to Sector South because there's a deteriorating series of problems down here in Sector South. One of the problems with this, and again, it starts to look like a peacekeeping operation traditionally, but it isn't. This is an ethnic war. This is not a war between necessarily like we would see with the Israelis and the Egyptians and the Israelis and the Syrians. There's an ethnic conflict where civilians are targeted, driven out, and this relates to the situation on the ground. When these lines were drawn, they weren't drawn to accommodate the ethnic mix in these places. So you had Serbs within Croatia, and then you had Croatians inside Serbian-controlled territory. That led to things like Medak Pocket, etc. This was a very complex operating environment. And again, with rules of engagement, is it peacekeeping? What is this? This is new. And people have to adapt on the fly. It's really critical. And they did. Except one of the problems here is because the Canadian forces are mechanized and they're quite proficient at a variety of operations. They get hived off by UN command to go do various things outside of those sectors. In this case, as Croatia's stabilizing, Bosnia collapses. And so the rear logistics hub for the UN forces, which had been Sarajevo at the airport, is under threat. And at that same time, you've got problems with feeding the population in the area. So the decision was made to take the Canadian battalion from Sector West and send it down to Sarajevo, where it gets involved in all sorts of things that don't look like peacekeeping at all, like using snipers to counter other snipers and so on, and using tow launchers to threaten people to get them to back off. Okay, so that's one of the excursions from UNPROFOR 1 into Bosnia, and then I'll get to Operation Calvier in a sec. This was an extremely complex environment, and I'll come back to it again because it was very, very public at the time. Okay, this is the first time we'd really seen war instantaneously on TV. Vietnam, it took like 8 hours to fly the tapes to North America. We're watching this on TV in LAR. Okay, so now, and that's another point I should bring up as well. Combat 1, the Canadian troops on UNPROFOR 1, this is the first time I think they're subjected to sophisticated information operations. Okay, so The Croatians are mounting extremely sophisticated operations called the Canadian Forces SERB-PROFOR, and implying that we're not neutral, that we're there to protect the Serbs and not protect the Croats. And we have no mechanism to deal with this. It's not really handled well. And there's more to that. Actually, somebody needs to study that and how we reacted or didn't react to it. But the objective here, if we're going to be UN peacekeepers and we're going to be neutral, well, this doesn't look neutral, especially when you're going in seizing an airhead and you're only shooting Serb snipers, not Bosnian snipers. You see the problem, okay? And it's hard to, it was increasingly difficult for the Canadian government and the armed forces to explain this to the population that understood peacekeeping to be Cyprus. This just gives you some of the rotations for Op Harmony, and you can see how extensive it is, okay? And ultimately, the last battalion group will be overrun by the Croatian army and disarmed as the Serbian population in southern Croatia is driven out. In fact, I meet some of those Serbs they're resettled in Kosovo, which is ironic. So, but that gives you that's extensive. If we're going to be comparing numbers and commitment, that is an extensive commitment all by itself. Okay. We'll move to Op Cavalier. So, as the situation in Bosnia completely deteriorates, the decision's made to create essentially a second UNPROFOR, but they're going to base it off the concept of operations that have been established in Sarajevo. And fundamentally what had happened in here, this is a multi-front, multi-everything civil war. So you have the Bosnian government, you have Muslim ethnic pockets here, you have Serbs everywhere else, you have Croatian pockets or enclaves inside Muslim enclave. The whole thing is like this ethnic tapestry. And this is Bihać, and I'll come to that later. So what you've got here is you've got a multi-front civil war with multiple parties. And there's a number of diplomats trying to sort this out. And one of the decisions is, and because there's so much media coverage of the humanitarian situation, UNPROFOR 2 comes into play. Essentially, it conducts armed humanitarian relief, or i.e. UNHCR convoys trying to feed everybody in the country, no matter where they are, regardless of lines. UNPROFOR 2 is going to escort them under whatever conditions and negotiate their way through and try to feed everybody. Now, there's obvious problems with that. And it also depends where you're operating. But, oh, there is a map. Let's use this map here. So, Canbat 2 winds up operating here, which is sort of northwest of Sarajevo. This is really important because the road network to get relief supplies everywhere goes through that area, but you have this Croatian enclave sitting on top of the MSR, and then it's surrounded by the Bosnian Muslim forces, okay, which included Al-Qaeda and a number of other interesting parties there. And so Canbat 2's being claim to fame was to negotiate the disengagement of the Kizilyat pocket so convoys could move through that area and spread out through northern Bosnia. There's a whole host of other things that Canbat 2 got involved in, but that's probably the most important. It also helped, it was also leveraged to get the Muslim population and the Croatian population working against the Serbs together. So that's a strong and important dimension to it. However, when we did try to establish peacekeeping type observation posts, they were taken hostage by the Serbian forces at one point. When I was visiting, I got scooped up by them too. And there were problems with rules of engagement, how far we could go. There's a number of stories that you could tell about Canbat 2 that still haven't come out yet, which is unfortunate. But it was extremely problematic. The other thing that would happen, when Srebrenica enclave was threatened, UN would pull a Canadian company group and send it up there to deter attacks against Srebrenica. Not to defend Srebrenica, and you should see the writing of the documents. It's like, we're going to deter attacks against Srebrenica, but not defend it. I mean, think about what that does to people on the ground, right? So we play a early part of that little drama, which results in 10,000 people getting murdered. And the problems with the UN and the Dutch bat up there, that sort of sits outside of our story, but we were sort of in there first. So I'd say that I don't know what we call it. It really wasn't peacekeeping. It had peacekeeping aspects. It's armed humanitarian intervention, but there was no real doctrine for that yet. So the guys are on the ground and making it up as they go, including using like tow launchers to destroy Serb tanks that shoot at UN outposts. There's all sorts of things like this going on. And so rotations tend to be battle group type. Vehicles are usually like Cougars and AVGPs. It was the Danes that brought the tanks. All right. Again, so look at this and compare it to UNPROFOR 1, which is happening at the same time. That's a lot of people for an army that's just has been cut by 1/4 by the elimination of 4 Brigade. Okay. Sidebar in this one is the BHATCH pocket, which is one of these anomalies that Canada gets involved in. It's Canadian ECMM monitors and some UNMOs that were involved in this one. They were mostly observing what was going on there. But to just show you how crazy this place could get, the enclave was dominated by Bosnian forces in the sense that it was a mix of Croatians and Muslims. It was run by a carpet dealer named Fikret Abdic, who somebody should write a novel about. And this guy was holding on to this piece of territory against the Bosnian Serb forces, and then the Croatian Serb forces, the Krajina's forces. Now, not everybody got along here, and Abdic would pay the Croatian Serbs to shell the Bosnian Serbs. I mean, this is mind-bending stuff. And in there was actually an Al-Qaeda training camp as well, to just keep it even more spicy. Basically, we have observers in there keeping an eye on it, because it tries to break away and become a separate republic from the Bosnian government. I mean, you can imagine how that is disruptive to the Bosnian government war effort against the Serbs. Again, our people were in there. They weren't necessarily trying to stabilize the place. They were mostly watching it. But again, we hadn't had to deal with anything like this. Like when we were in 4 Brigade, it was kill every Warsaw Pact soldier coming down Highway 6, and then everybody's going to use tactical nuclear weapons, and there we are. So our people had to adjust and deal with this stuff on the fly, and they usually did a really good job about it, and that's something that needs to be studied more. UNPRODEP, another situation where you take a company group from Bosnia, the Canadian Canbat 2, and then feed it into Macedonia. Now, at this point, the Serbs are playing games with the Macedonians. It looks like they're going to expand hostilities and do all sorts of things here and try to engage and retake Macedonia. So a multinational UN-led operation is established called UNPRODEP, United Nations Preventative Deployment. And Canada winds up contributing a company group in its initial formula until it stabilizes. At one point, the Americans take the remnants of the Berlin Brigade and feed it into this. Okay, and then there'll be a Norwegian organization and a Swedish one, and it's actually quite effective. The Serbs just completely back off on this. The importance of this is it becomes the basis of Kosovo force later on. Okay, so we had experience on the ground, albeit relatively briefly, but again, it shows you how flexible our people are, how we're being used by the UN to deal with situations like this throughout the conflict, in addition to the stuff on the ground in Bosnia. Oop. Now, I do not have a number of how many UNMOs served. I know 10 at least. There's way more than that. And the UNMOs have a separate reporting chain of command from UNPROFOR 1 and 2. They perform a wide variety of observational tasks to feed information for situational awareness up to New York. We could debate how effective New York is when it gets the information. But UNMOs operating unarmed in small groups with other countries, and so they're at tremendous risk. One UNMO who I know, Pat Stogren, wound up in the Gorazda Enclave, which was a Muslim enclave besieged by the Serbs. And he helped bring in a bunch of SAS to do ground control of fires to get the Serbs to back off. And that's the kind of thing people were drifting into. Is that peacekeeping? Is that, like, what is it? What do you call it? It's adaptation on the ground to get the job done, but there's no doctrinal structure for it, and yet it works. So there's a lot more to be told about what our UNMOs did and where they did it, but they tend to be personal stories. There's no institutional history on this, unfortunately. And Canadian logistics battalions, always overlooked. These guys are at risk all the time with the convoys, getting held hostage, the whole bit. And I actually took a convoy in 95 with them from Primiston in Croatia all the way into our camps in the central part of Bosnia. So I got to see what they had to deal with, okay? You'd have people pop up and block the road. You'd have the people be bribed their way through. People try to steal stuff off the vehicles, the whole bit. So we can't forget what our logistics people did here, because it's the first time they had to do anything like that. And it helped set them up for success in Afghanistan. Now, Sharp Guard. This gets, again, completely overlooked. And we had a naval presence in the Adriatic for the entire period. And this was actually quite successful, too. I won't read the list here, but the important aspect is that's the naval commitment over time. Can we do that today? Okay, right? And a pair of those guys. Okay, so let me get into what they did. So what you're looking at are the operation areas for Sharp Guard. What Sharp Guard was, it was an amalgam of WEU and NATO enforcing UN sanctions. Okay, and the objective here was to stop weapons coming into the former Yugoslavia by sea. And it's a multinational task force, initially based on Standing Naval Force Atlantic. It changes in composition, but Canada always provides significant salient forces to it. Now, this environment is not benign. And in this case, you've got cigarette smugglers moving back and forth that can get in the way of things. But the former Yugoslavian Navy is a problem here. And so to prevent, basically what would happen is blockade runners would come in by ship, they'd be boarded by Sharp Guard forces and turned back, or inspected, and if there were no weapons allowed to go forward. This was happening like daily. At the same time, again, the map's a bit blurry, but there were 6 submarines. Some of them would sortie out from Coder Bay, and those would have to be watched. So every maritime patrol aircraft in NATO would sit there and track them. There would be all the good old Cold War games of let's light up NATO with fire control radar and see how they react. Let's launch a Jastra jet aircraft and make it look like a cruise missile and head it towards HMCS Halifax and see how they react. Okay, this is the kind of stuff that's going on. And then our Aurora conducting ELINT type activities, good old ferret operations. This is like the Cold War in miniature. And it's dangerous because you're dealing with an enemy that's unpredictable. Submarines are always difficult to track in the Adriatic. You don't know what's spoofed, what's not. So high risk, high threat, high tension environment for the entire time, okay? And again, I think that's something that we should not forget about as well. Now, here's what happens. Our opponents in the smuggling game realize they can't bring, what it does is it generates inflexibility in the other side's smuggling apparatus. They got to try and bring stuff in through the Danube, by land, by air, okay? And this generates friction. It's not a panacea, but it definitely generates friction. Op air bridge. Okay, so this is our support to UNHCR. That's a picture I took. It got a bit wet. Anyway, pair of Hercs, heavily modified. Armor, defensive systems, radar warning receivers, the whole bit. This is a dangerous game. The Italians have a G222 shot down. Okay? Right before I was supposed to fly in, an Ilyushin 76 got shredded by AAA, had to turn back and land at Ancona. So the decision was made that we weren't going to fly into Sarajevo using airbridge. But it was in support of UNHCR, okay? And it had its complexities. So, okay, you fly in, you drop off the humanitarian aid, and UNHCR takes that away and does that. Well, sometimes you have to shut the air bridge down because aircraft are getting shot at. Well, it turns out, as some people think, the black market community in Sarajevo is getting its own AAA to shoot at UNHCR aircraft to increase the prices of the aid. So these are things that we had never encountered before. Not like this. Okay? So this will continue on until about 1995. Oh, and of course, there's an air logistical control element that's part of this as well. It's not just the aircraft. That doesn't come out too well, but basically Ancona is the staging part right into Sarajevo. And again, these guys are getting lit up by fire control radar, all sorts of things. Deny flight. Again, because Canada's contribution to this is it seems to be small, people forget that the thing even exists. But deny flight is essentially the aerial version of Sharp Guard. Nobody's going to fly anything to conduct airstrikes against anybody inside Bosnia. And when the Serbs tried it, the Dutch shot down a bunch of their aircraft, make the point. But when the British came in to support the Bosnian Muslims, then they got shot down by the Serbs. So there was a lot of games getting played here. Okay? And our involvement, as far as I know, was limited to NATO AWACS crew. And we'd have our people on the AWACS. I don't think we had anything else involved in the operations, but again, it gives you an idea of the dimensions and the things that we're doing there. Operation Deliberate Force and Deliberate Effort. So, after a series of outrages where civilians were targeted in Sarajevo, the decision was made to develop a relationship between the UN and NATO to provide air support in various ways. This can get really complicated, so I'm just going to distill it. For our purposes, we had to bring in people that had we call it JTAC now. I don't think the term existed yet. It would just be FU-FAC back then, but basically what we know as JTAC stuff now. We brought in JTF2, Special Operations people with the appropriate equipment and communications to be able to direct airstrikes as required, to protect UNPRO 4 or for other purposes. So by that point, by 1995, you're into a situation where UNPRO 4 is not a neutral party. It's caught up in multiple belligerencies, and then it's forced to protect itself, okay? So in this case, we had special operations people that were part of that were there to help assist with airstrikes to try to extract people. Now, when I was on the ground in 95, things had really deteriorated, and there was a plan called Blue Sword, where basically NATO would come in and just blow away everything that was shooting at Canadian forces, and then we'd extract out. The Canadian forces would extract out. But then, you had the Turkish battalion that was going to take off its UN uniform and fight for the Muslims. Same with the Pakistanis. You had Iran flying in blacked out Hercs at night. Okay, there was all sorts of weird stuff going on at this point. And so by 95, the dimensions of it wasn't even peacekeeping. It was something else. And we were prepared. At one point, there was a plan to destroy all of the vehicles and extract our people. Okay? Or the Canadian battalion and the Brit CAVBAT were going to be the hinge to hold the door open while everybody extracted from northern Bosnia to airfields down south and extracted. There was another plan to bring the 10th Mountain Division in. I mean, it was elaborate stuff. And it sets us up, I don't cover it here, but for I-4. Okay? And so there was a lot going on. And this is where you've got my next door neighbor from 4 Brigade from the mess handcuffed to an ammo dump on CNN in Palais. And so when the airstrikes start up, the Serbs figure out how to use and abuse peacekeeping forces as human shields. And nobody had to have to deal with that before. You'll see how this is a pattern. This is a steep learning curve, very steep for our institution. And then we got the transition to I-4. How are we doing so far?
We're good.
All right.
10 minutes.
Oh, great. Now, this is another point I want to make. All the stuff that's going on we just talked about is happening concurrently with these operations. Okay? Think about the stress this is putting on our institutions, our people particularly. Okay? And so, again, I'm speaking as somebody who's done Afghanistan and somebody who's studied and done the Balkans, this gets overlooked. What was happening and what was happening to the institution in the early to mid-90s has not been recognized. In fact, there's no official history of any of this as far as I'm aware. Okay? So that's significant for everybody that was there and everybody that was institutionally affected by this. And I don't think at that point that the government really understood this. And we can debate why. They kept committing people, to the operations, and they weren't looking at the larger aspects of this. So when we're looking at issues like OSI, PTSD, et cetera, from that particular period, you know, it's not a surprise that it's that significant. So there you go.